We were the first testing laboratory to test for HHC. Somebody is making hemp-derived Delta 8 or Delta 9 THC. The starting point is typically CBD. Just the other day, we were testing a material that was supposed to be HHCP, and we tested it and ended up being THCH. I mean, there's
Welcome to CBD College. Welcome to CBD College, everybody. 皆さんこんにちは、ダグラスです。今日はですね、大麻業界のかなりテクニカルな内容の動画になります。どちらかというと業界に所属している方、もしくはビジネスサイドに興味ある方が面白いと思う内容になっていると僕は思うんですが、大麻産業に興味あったり、ビジネスサイドどうやってなっているのかなっていうのに興味がある人は、なるほどって思えるのではないかというふうにも思います。さらにユーザーさんにとっても、商品を買う時の目印、そして基準ができると思うので、一応ですねかなりためになる内容にはなっているはずです。というのもですね、今日は KCA ラボというアメリカのカンナビノイドを検査するラボの、CCO であるライアンさんを、僕がインタビューする内容を皆さんにお届けしたいと思います。カンナビノイドの検査というのはもともと原料だったり製品にCBD とか CBG が何%入っているのか、微生物だったりとか、こういった混ぜ物が入ってはいけないものが入っているかどうかの検査、要は品質検査ですね、これを行っている、ラボになるんですけれども、通常はですね各メーカー各原料屋さんはこれを情報を常にお客様に開示していくのがお客様が安心して買える目印になるわけなんですけれども、ほとんどの日本のですね、メーカー、世界でもぶっちゃけそうなんですけれどもこれを行っていない状況でございます。なので、これは非常に問題視しているのが、我々はもちろん検査機関の方なので、今日は検査の重要性だったり検査がどのように行われているのか、どの検査がどの原料やどの製品に適しているのか、こういうことがいろいろ皆さんにお届けできたらなというふうに思います。そしてね、こちらかなりの長編になってます。約40分ぐらいの内容です。で、最初は前後編に分けようと思ったんですけれども、非常に区切るところが難しくてですね、こう見てると見入っちゃうので一発でいった方がいいなというふうに思ったので、これは最後まで見てください。途中で止めて後で見るとかでもいいと思うんですけれども、分ける意味があんまないかなと思ったので今後一発で流させていただきます。なのでほぼノーカットですね。A とか A とかそういった部分を切りましたけど、内容としては全残しなので非常にいい内容になっております。皆さんこの情報を共有されることで、おそらく今後の業界の不祥事だったりとか、これはおかしいなっていう目が養えると思いますので、ぜひ最後までご覧ください。それではどうぞ。
okay.
So Ryan, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it. I'm very excited to talk to you today because it's not every day that you get to talk to a cannabinoid testing executive. So today I was hoping that you could shed some light to the viewers on how cannabinoid testing works, and maybe to discuss a little bit the importance of companies actually testing their products with a legitimate lab and to produce legitimate COAs. So let's get right into it. I think I'll let you take over and sort of introduce yourself and the history of KCA and how it sort of came to be.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. So my name is Ryan Ballone. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of KCA Laboratories. We're a third-party analytical lab in Kentucky here in the United States. We have several designations or accreditations that give us more credibility as a testing lab. We're registered with the Drug Enforcement Agency here in the United States. We're licensed by the Kentucky Department of Agriculture to test hemp. We are also registered with the Japanese Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare as a registered U.S. laboratory. The laboratory was started back in 2019. The history of our lab, we started the lab thinking, okay, there's some issues going on in the U.S. market with regards to testing and the quality of testing. A lot of complaints that were made on the internet, as well as just in the community here in general. And we thought, because of our team and our history testing drugs, testing tobacco, testing liquor, as well as dietary supplements and human samples for the presence of drugs, that we could use that experience and get into the market and hopefully provide the market with at least just as good, or if not better, testing than what was available. So so back in 2019 was basically when the hemp market here in the United States came, I don't want to say crashing, but the price fell quite a bit. There's an oversupply of hemp.
And
And
so after the Farm Bill, and then there was a surge of hemp farmers in the business, and then just oversaturation all over the place.
Yeah, it was basically like the hemp green rush, gold rush sort of scenario. Just to give you some perspective, back in 2019, Kentucky alone grew 45,000 acres of hemp. And just this year, we grew 1,200 acres of hemp. So a huge decrease since then. And we still hear about biomass, hemp biomass still being available here in Kentucky that was grown back in 2019. That's how much was grown. So it's still being used 4 years later.
How does it go bad?
It can get moldy, can get smelly and everything. But I mean, you're not going to use it, for smoking purposes or anything. But once you extract it and using various solvents, you can gain new use out of it. Really, the pesticides and the heavy metals are the things that linger after extraction. So yeah, it's important to obviously use that material in such a way that gets rid of the microbiology issues that can arise, or even mycotoxins that can arise. But yeah, it's over the years we've been helping, for the most part, farmers early on. Our very first clients were farmers growing hemp here in Kentucky, and over time we've become more well known and more established in the processing market, where we still test flower and hemp biomass material, but a lot of it has led to us testing the crude extracts, the distillates, the isolates, and then the conversion materials that come about from those, as well as from the synthetic starting points that are in the market today. So yeah,
I wanted to sort of ask you, like, KCA became famous in Japan probably right after the synthetics came in, and then you were one of the first ones to be able to test those. I was just wondering, how did you get those testing results so early on compared to some of the other labs that are available in the United States?
Yeah, so even nowadays, we're different from other testing labs because a lot of testing labs still just use what's called HPLC, high performance liquid chromatography. And we started out testing that way too. But over time, we've developed our own GCMS method, which is gas chromatography with mass spectrometry. That GCMS methodology and instrumentation itself is basically the gold standard for testing drugs. So we have lots of history testing for drugs in other industries, and anti-doping, specifically horse racing here in Kentucky, which is quite famous. So we already knew how to test for drugs. And synthetic cannabinoids are more closely related to drugs, and are drugs, rather than the biomass extracts that you would see tested on HPLC, which HPLC is great at testing those. The reason why we are one of the first to test for these, in addition to having that instrumentation and the know-how and the methodology, is because we did have access to the reference standards quite early on. we were the first testing laboratory to test for HHC, which is a conversion product from delta 8 THC or delta 9 THC over to HHC through hydrogenation. So we got a big name around that because that was one of the first cannabinoids that was kind of going overseas to new markets and wasn't as well known and got more of a name behind it. Our goal was always to just tell people what the material is. It's the manufacturers, the distributors, the brokers' responsibility to decide if it's something that should be put in the market. So a lot of people think, oh, well, because KCA tests for HHC or some of these other psychoactive cannabinoids, that we are supporters of that industry. And really, our position is neutral. We want to test materials, tell people what is in them.
Right.
And then with that information, people can decide what to do with it further, if they're going to consume it, if they're going to sell it, if they're going to make it. And then further from that, we kept our eyes on the various new cannabinoids that were coming out, looking for reference standards, helping companies make reference standards, giving guidance specifically to Cayman Chemical on what's coming next, what to expect. And then we were the first laboratory here in the US, maybe even in the whole market, to have access to the Delta 8 ISO THC and Delta 4.8 ISO THC reference standards made by Cayman, which are actually byproducts of some of these synthetic reactions, namely the CBD to D8 reaction or CBD to D9 THC reaction. Yeah, so we wanted to find a niche in the market that wasn't being supported by other testing laboratories, and it was really this new and kind of, it had been in existence, but this synthetic market that these people are going to make these chemicals and put them into the market, whether there's testing or not. And so
Absolutely.
we believe that the testing needs to be there so people can make educated decisions.
I completely agree. Just one thing you mentioned, the byproduct in the chemical reaction from the cannabinoid into the synthetic, the byproduct is usually D8 or something like that. Is that pretty common?
Yeah. So if somebody is making hemp-derived Delta 8 or Delta 9 THC, the starting point is typically CBD. And so whether that cannabidiol is extracted from the plant material or it's synthetically made to begin with, that's the starting point. And then an acid catalyzed isomerization of CBD is what creates the Delta 9 and then the Delta 8. And at the same time, there's other pathways that CBD makes Delta 9 and Delta 8 on one pathway, but it also turns into Delta 8 iso THC and Delta 4.8 iso THC on another pathway. And so there's likely other pathways as well. We see other byproducts that we can't identify yet.
Right.
We hope to be able to, sometime in the near future, to give a full picture of what's in these products so that people can either know that they're there and that they need to be removed, or know that they're there and decide not to use it because of that reason. Our testing goes either way. We want our testing to help people make decisions, but yes, we almost always see these byproducts present. Right. And if we can't identify them, we can see them in the data as an unknown peak, and we're like, okay, what is that?
Right. Okay. So you're saying, you take the CBD and then you do the catalyzation and then it turns into 9 and then 8, and then a lab will hydrogenate that and whatever, and then it'll come out to HH something.
Yep.
But
HHC.
It could still include that Delta 9 prior to the chemical reaction. Is that correct?
Yeah. So what actually happens? Well, the Delta 8 and Delta 9 will convert to HHC. The ISO THCs, the D8 ISO and the D4.8 ISO THCs will actually turn into ISO HHC. So those, whatever you're starting with, will convert over into something new whether it be a known or an unknown, and whether we have reference materials or not. So I think it's important to note that testing on HPLC, as I've mentioned, will not be able to have the specificity to discern between delta 8 THC and delta 8 iso THC, or delta 9 and delta 4/8 iso THC. So everything can either look at like one large compound like a delta 8, or with other compounds within, or get a little more separation and see just delta 8 and delta 9 with those isos inside those peaks. And with the GCMS, you're able to get all those separated out. So testing, the idea of testing is to get everything separated and identified and quantified separately, so that you're actually, reporting as accurate values as possible. These compounds, when they're being made, the importance of the purity of the starting material is significant, because really, if let's say you're starting with a distillate to make delta 8, I mean, you're starting with all these other cannabinoids and unknowns that then get isomerized just like the CBD, but a different pathway leading to different compounds.
Right. Okay. Wow, that's very interesting. Yeah, I was talking to actually yesterday a guy from Eurofin, the lab in Europe, but he was mentioning that for CBD isolates, when you extract CBD, there's always CBDV, just because it's too similar and it's really hard to separate the two. So when it's pure CBD, it's probably synthetic. Is that a correct thing? I mean,
I guess it depends on that pathway, right? Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the same deal, because thinking about CBD and synthetic CBD, there's a pathway to get to CBD as well, and it depends on the quality of those starting materials.
Okay, I see.
As well. And so, if you have a 5-chain starting material, you can end up with CBD. If maybe it's contaminated with a 4-chain, and you end up with some of that CBDV as well. And it's important to note that, yes, the naturally extracted and then concentrated CBD isolate that's in the market almost always contains CBDV. I don't recall any natural CBD not containing CBDV, but that CBDV, when it's acid catalyzed as well, is going to turn into delta 9 THCV as well as delta 8 THCV. So that same reaction will happen. So CBDV, the same thing, delta 9 THCV, delta 8 THCV, and also the CBDV will also turn to delta 8 iso THCV as well as delta 4/8 iso THCV, and then we assume delta 4 iso THCV. So you can continue to see these patterns with all these various THC homologs and how they're made, and kind of predict some of these byproducts in each of these reactions.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Wow. One more thing about the standardized material. So for example, right now, in Japan, HHCH is probably about to get banned this month or next month. So the next thing, people are already talking about it, probably HHCB or something. But from what I can tell, there isn't really a standardized material yet. So there is no COA available. But early on, when I forgot which compound, I forgot which synthetic it was, but when nobody had the standardized material, one lab, I'm not going to name names, but they wrote on their COA something the compound name, and then they showed like a peak. So I don't know how they came up with it. So I guess they tested it and there's something in there, and the chemical reaction should, in theory, create this synthetic. So they just guessed, or
I'm not sure which lab, but yeah, if you don't have a reference standard to compare against, you really don't absolutely know for sure what the compound is that you're testing, and we don't really trust the quantification of a material without a reference standard being able to create calibration curves either. But there are labs that are doing some identity work using NMR. You can do fragmentation of ions on a mass spec, like what we do. We just won't put that substance on a certificate of analysis and quantify if we don't have a reference standard. Some labs are willing to do that, and it's not as accepted of practice in the analytical testing community. Typically, you want to have a certified reference material, or CRM, to test against from an ISO 17034 accredited laboratory that makes these reference materials. If you don't have access to a CRM, then you move down to an RM, a reference material, which is, I believe, greater than 95% purity. Still identified by a third party. Having a third party and all of this, including us as a testing lab, as well as a reference material laboratory being third party, is all key, so that you can so that the conflicts of interest of doing the identity, as well as the testing, I should say the characterization as well as the testing isn't there, as long as you can have it spread across different entities. But yeah, some labs are doing that in-house. They're trusting work done by unaccredited laboratories. I think it's important to require your testing laboratory to have the ISO 17025 accreditation, but it's also important to scrutinize a testing laboratory to make sure that they are using those certified reference materials when they're available.
Can you just tell
quantify
the people who don't know what the 17025 certification is?
Yeah, so ISO, the International Standards Organization, 17025 is a testing and calibration accreditation for laboratories. It's basically checking your quality systems to ensure that you're doing documentation, that you maintain traceability, that you're impartial and uphold confidentiality. There's audits that occur, lots of paperwork that gets reviewed. But unfortunately, this accreditation does not make sure that you're accurately testing what you claim to be testing, and it doesn't make sure that the methods are what we call fit for purpose.
The bare minimum.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, it's really more on the paperwork quality system side rather than really digging into the methods. And really, we're not aware of a body that's checking methods to make sure the method is the best at testing a certain matrix type or a certain substance for whatever cannabinoid or substance you're trying to test for. So, we've done a lot of work doing a lot of method development and learning that, like I said before, learning that the HPLC is not as good at identifying and quantifying without any bias as compared to a GCMS for certain compounds. It's still, like I said, it's still great for testing plant materials, still great for testing crude extracts and all the way up to isolates. But once you get into synthetics or even post-processed material like remediated material, it cannot discern between various substances. And that ISO accreditation does not go far enough. So we'll need to see some regulatory requirements put in place. And one thing I do fear is putting regulations in place that in my opinion, and our opinion here at KCA Labs, requires the wrong testing for a certain substance rather than a more appropriate method, fit for purpose method.
Okay. Well, you guys are in, I guess the last time I met you, you mentioned you're in how many countries right now?
Well, we only have the one laboratory here in the US, here in Kentucky. We'll be putting an office in Japan and actually already have an office leased, and we'll be making that announcement hopefully here soon. But we do have clients from about 30 different countries now, including from Japan. We have plenty of people shipping us samples from Japan to the US, as well as from within the US to KCA Labs before import into Japan. But yeah, we work with companies all over the world at this point. Unfortunately, there's a lot of underserved countries and markets all around the world, since this is a brand new industry that faced prohibition for many decades. And so, yeah, we want to be able to support all these companies all around the world. As I mentioned, we're DEA registered. We can handle drugs scheduled 1 through 5, and the shippers know who we
because
are.
of horse racing drug tests.
Yeah, I mean, because of that, because of our history, we do feel comfortable handling and testing for drugs. Yes, but it is.
Well, I'm trying to get is that you guys have a lot of experience in testing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So you guys mentioned that you have done like an insane amount of tests over these past like 3 years or something, right? Like,
yes. Oh yeah. So next month would be 4 years since we've tested our first sample, and we just crossed the 35,000 sample threshold, I guess.
Yeah.
And that's amounted to over 100,000 tests across 4 years. So yeah, it's been a lot of testing we've been doing. And we have, at this point, we have 4 different cannabinoid methods. We're testing for 70 different cannabinoids. And yeah, so we're testing for all the various contaminants, heavy metals, microbials, mycotoxins, pesticides, residual solvents, catalyst metals for these reactions, these hydrogenation reactions like palladium and platinum,
right.
And do a lot of terpene work as well. Have a really nice method for that. But yeah, for the most part, we want to be the top cannabinoid lab in the country, if not the world, and testing for as many as we can and testing for them as accurately as possible.
Wow. Well, you guys were just designated as the Japan Health Ministry one of the official offshore labs. So you guys definitely have the credentials. What does that mean when you're designated by the Japanese Health Ministry? Do they ask you to check for stuff?
We as a lab here in the US are one of many, mostly food labs, but one of just a few hemp testing labs here in the US. But yeah, we've positioned ourselves to help support the import-export industry that's happening, so that we can test materials before they get exported and then imported into Japan. If you test with us, we give you a certificate of analysis, and that certificate of analysis accompanying that material into Japan is looked at. They know who we are.
Right.
They appreciate our testing and understand that when they look at a certificate of analysis from KCA Labs, that means that those results should be accurate, as accurate as they can be for now. And I do want to mention that 4 years ago we were testing everything on HPLC, just like most other labs. And now 4 years later, we have 4 different methods. We have an HPLC method, an LCMS method, and 2 GCMS methods. And knowing when to use those methods is important, but we actually had to learn from testing that there were these substances present, that we needed better separation, that we needed to develop new methods, validate those methods, and continue developing the science here internally and in the industry to help better the industry and better us as a testing laboratory. And we're aware now that maybe in the future there's better methods that we need to either develop or adopt later on. to test even more accurately or test for other substances. I mean, it's one of those things where we didn't get into the industry just to get a method from our instrument manufacturer and run it and tell people information. We wanted to make this industry better. We wanted to provide the best information possible so people can make the best decisions for themselves. I mean, it's super important that the truth about material is out there.
Absolutely.
So that people can make these decisions. You know, innocent people can go to jail because of misidentifications of Delta-9 THC, namely false negatives. And just the other day, we were testing a material that was supposed to be HHCP, and we tested it and ended up being THCH. I mean, there's misidentifications going on all over the place. So, you know, in the start of the talk, you asked that question: why is it important for testing? And really, when material changes hands, each time it changes hands, you have to trust that person that they're telling you what this material is. And the only way you know what the material you have in hand is to do the testing yourself. And so there's certificates of analysis that are misrepresenting material, that are actually being taken from one company, modified company information and QR codes removed, and then used to represent another material that may be not as high quality. So I think it's important. I know testing costs money. We understand that.
Sure.
You know, we can understand it's a cost, but it's important to know what you're selling and what you're buying is what you intend to be selling and buying. And so testing is really the only way to check.
Yeah, well, there's another problem here. A lot of brands will just post COAs of the bulk ingredients that they use, and they don't post the COAs of the finished product. So people don't know if the actual percentage that's on the package is the actual percentage that they're getting.
Yep.
So that's also a big problem dosing wise, because people are not dosing correctly, and then that will mess up their whole routine. And
yeah,
especially if you're taking it for medical reasons, then that's a bad thing. So
yeah, I mean, you might look at CBD unfavorably because you used an underdosed product.
Right.
You know, it's key to test the finished product. And you know, even with contaminants like heavy metals and pesticides, they could come from the other ingredients in the finished product. A lot of people don't think about these food ingredients containing some of these contaminants, but really the potency, you know, I think is a starting point. We need to know what the material is, what cannabinoids are present at what concentrations, and then the product can be dosed correctly in its final form and then tested to ensure that. Imagine that somebody buys a product, they're given a certificate of analysis that says that it's 80% CBD, but it's actually, if you were to test it again, it would actually be, let's say, 65% CBD, and then you're making product with that. It's going to get underdosed all the way through the supply chain, all the way through the finished good. And it might even be, and in the very end, it might not even be CBD. It could be CBN, CBG, or something else. I know there's issues with materials being cut along the way. You know, it's important to you should trust your supplier, and you know, assume that they're selling you what they intend to be selling, what you intend to be buying. But you should always verify with your own testing as soon as it changes hands. That's proper GMP. If you look at pharma or dietary supplements, GMP would require you to quarantine new materials, verify its identity and purity, and then you can release it into production. And that's where I want to see these markets, including in Japan, start moving towards. In the US, it's starting to get there. Some of the more reputable manufacturers are doing that. But there's this haste that's in the market where everybody wants to sell quickly, buy quickly, produce quickly, and they're not taking the time to verify and ensure quality and ensure that the finished product meets formulation specs. And unfortunately, you end up with sub-potent product, or product that really isn't even what you thought it would be.
That is got it right. Absolutely. I agree. So your Japanese office will be opening pretty soon. I think Roger's going to make the announcement probably next month, I think he said.
Yeah. So we're looking to finalize our registration.
Mhm.
Our office is going to be at the Tokyo University of Science and Technology. I'll get an address here soon, but that's where samples can be shipped to once we're going live. And then our team in Japan will be packaging samples and shipping those samples to the laboratory here in the US on behalf of everyone. We'll work out the customs issues ourselves, and that way, people can trust that the samples can arrive at the US lab and get tested. Then we just email certificates back to our clients. So really the hardest part is going to just be getting the samples to our office. I want to make it one more comment about testing. I think a lot of people think that because we're a DEA registered lab, or we're licensed by the government here in the US, specifically Kentucky Department of Agriculture, that we have to give these results to these various bodies.
Right.
And share that, but that's not true. ISO 17025, I know we touched on that, requires confidentiality. We don't share information with anybody else other than the paying client.
Right.
Without that paying client's permission, of course. We can, if we need to get on a call with their supplier or something, we can discuss, but it has to be with permission from that paying client. And then those test results are only sent to the paying client and nobody else. We've never been subpoenaed or asked by the government to share results, and we would fight that request. And really, the reason this needs to happen is because people need to know that they won't get in trouble for having the material tested that maybe test out a different way than they were expecting, including having presence of THC or some other banned substance. It's important that people know this, because then if there's continue to sell this material or formulate this material with these banned substances in them, they can get in a lot of trouble later on, and really ignorance won't get them out of trouble.
Right. Well, I think the big problem in Japan is most of the buyers, the users, don't really know the importance of the COAs and all of this. So hopefully this video will help them, inform them, and make them ask their suppliers to actually produce a COA, so that in turn makes the brand sort of, put their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, exactly. It's the manufacturer's responsibility to get the testing done. They know what they're making. They should understand what tests are required. They should do the industry the service of providing that information to, especially to end users, so that people can make those informed decisions.
All right, Ryan. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Doug. I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate you inviting me to be on your program.
Oh, thank you, man. You're really inspiring when I met you. So I was like, oh, I gotta have this guy on. So it was good. It was
great.
Good. All right, man.
Yeah, if there's any follow-up questions or anything, let me know, especially from the audience. Always happy to help. People can email us at japan@kcalabs.com. They can sign up for an account at kcalabs.com, and we can get them set up with submitting samples.
All right.
And,
I'll put a link in the video so people can look what's up.
All right. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
All right. You too. Good morning. Yeah. All right.
All right.
All right. See you around, man.